Before you have cinematics that look like this.
Or just keep going. I'm sure this is a great big misunderstanding.
Who are you, old man? Why are you here?
They look a little more like this. There's no cameras, there's no lights except for the temporary ones I've just put up, and you're just floating around the scene and you kind of have to assemble things from there. Cinematography is the study of how moving images convey emotion and feeling to the audience. It's a language that we have built up as a culture over the course of years and years of watching films, TV shows, and playing video games. In this video, I'm going to go over how we decide where to put the cameras, or why we put them where we put them, and how the Unreal sequencer works in a quick and hopefully easy to follow step-by-step guide. This is Myrkur Games. We're a small game development studio here in Reykjavik, Iceland, and we're working on our first ever video game, Echoes of the End. Now let's take a look at the Unreal sequencer. As you can see here, I've put the scene together in Unreal. I've deleted all the cameras we had and a lot of the lights, and right now we've got some of the temporary lights in here, or the environmental lights, and we've got these 2 point lights just so that we can see what we're doing. And the first thing I do when I'm working on a scene like this is that I put it together in Unreal and I just look at it. You can see here that this sequence is actually a couple of different mocap takes strung together, and they have these different edit points baked in based on performance, right? We filmed it several different times, and certain takes worked better in certain areas than other takes in other areas, right? So we pick the best out of each take and we string them together, and we have our sort of baseline there. Step one for any kind of cinematography is just to look at the scene, try and figure out what you have, what you like about it, and how you want to frame it.
You're bringing this whole place down all around us. Just listen to me. Or just keep going. I'm sure this is a great big misunderstanding.
Who are you, old man? Why are you here?
My name is Abram Finley.
During this part of the process, I sometimes just fly the camera around. I sort of have a look at what all the individual bits are. You know, I try floating the camera here. I hold down C just to sort of see what it looks like with a more zoomed in lens. Try and find my angles. Okay, you know, here they are.
Exchanging letters with this region's ward guardian.
She's reading this letter. We're gonna want an angle of her reading the letter probably. They're quite standoffish. She's literally got a sword pointed at his head, so I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna try and frame that standoff a little bit like they're at odds, like they might fight. We can also take it from either side. We could be on this side of them or on this side of them. In cinematography, there's this concept called the 180-degree rule. Basically, you draw an invisible line between the two characters. If we look at it from above, this should be fairly obvious. You draw the line across like this, and then you pick a side of the line that you stick to. The reason you do this is so that the characters appear to be looking at each other. If I film Abram here from this angle, and then I film Rin here from this angle, it looks like they're both looking in the same direction. So what I want to do is I want to film Rin from this side, and then I also film Abram from the same side of the 180-degree rule. That way their eye lines match up. A part of the first steps here is also trying to figure out what side of the 180-degree line I want to be on. And that has a lot to do with culture. And in particular, in this instance, Western culture. I'm Icelandic, so I consider myself to be a Westerner in this way because I read from left to right. If you grew up in a country where you read from left to right, or if you watched a lot of movies made in countries where people read from left to right, you tend to associate things that go left to right as forward progress and things that go right to left as backward progress, or rather things that go right to left as being sinister. So if Rin is our hero, we might want to face her like this, so that she's on the right side of the screen looking towards the left, right? That's typical hero shots would frame it that way. But in this instance, she's being antagonistic to a new character. And a part of our job here as cinematographers is going to introduce this character as somebody that you are gonna spend the rest of your gameplay with. Abram is the key companion in the game. You spend the majority of the game playing with him as your companion. So as the cinematographer right now, it's my job to make sure that I use every trick I can to frame him right. One of those tricks is I'm going to put him on the left side of the screen looking right, which means I'm framing Rin as the antagonist in the situation, which isn't inaccurate. She's got a sword pointed at his neck, right? Now, as I watch the scene play out, I try and figure out the key beats. You know, here's this bit where she's got the sword pointed at him, and that sort of sets a certain status quo. So naturally, an obvious point in the scene would be, when does she lower her sword?
Is he all right?
No. He's dead. A month ago.
And the moment that happens, the scene changes. She puts her sword away, and now they're walking around, they're having a look at the caves. Suddenly it's no longer about, will Rin kill this guy? It's about, what are they going to do next? Why are they here? Who are these people? What are their motivations? And it's trying to dig down on the core concepts of what the hell is going on. So now that we've passed this, we know that there's a natural breakpoint where the scene changes from being about one thing to being about another thing. Let's go make a camera. Making a camera in Unreal is very easy. You click on this camera button in the Unreal sequencer. Click, there it is. We've now got a camera, we're automatically possessing it. You can tell we're possessing the camera because there is this blue button on the camera icon right here on this thing called Cine Camera Actor. We're just going to rename this. I like naming things. We're going to call it Cam 1, and we're going to put it in a folder. Because eventually we'll have loads of cameras, and then sometime later I'm going to come along and I'm going to forget what any of those folders were or what any of the structure is, or somebody else is going to come along and have to open the scene, and I want them to have an easy time of it, whether it's someone else or the poor victim I call Daði from the future. This camera immediately has a bunch of default settings on it. We can go here to the details panel. Whenever you're working in sequencer, the details panel is your friend. That's where all your options come in, because this is the timeline. It is literally a progress timeline from the start to finish. So anything that's permanently not changing over the timeline, you'll find in the details panel. And you can see here it's got a bunch of settings, a film back, lens settings. I typically don't mess with the film back settings. You can use them to simulate different kind of sensor sizes. So if you're somebody who's used to working with Super 35 lenses or VistaVision or IMAX or any of those things, you might associate certain film back sizes with certain lens sizes. But if you're just thinking IMAX is really high quality and I want best quality, so I'll pick IMAX, that's not really what it's simulating. 70mm in this case isn't simulating more pixels. That's not what the film back is doing. It's just figuring out how to reinterpret the lens data. Now, I'm somebody who shoots a lot with a DSLR, like I'm doing right now on this camera ahead of me. I think in terms of the DSLR lens. The DSLR is about here. The digital film is a little more cropped in. Those settings, I think, are similar enough that I'll just use the default settings a lot of the time when it comes to film back, and then I'll mess around with the specific lens settings. If you can hear hiccups, it's Haida looking at you. Here in lens settings, you've got your minimum focal length, your maximum focal length, the f-stops and stuff like that. This is the sort of shape and design of your lens. You can mess with these when you get a bit more into it. I also like looking at these presets just as kind of possible settings that you can set to your camera, whether it's a 50mm or an 80mm, and they've got a baked in f-stop and stuff like that. All of these figures here on the Cine Camera lens are meant to simulate actual lenses as close as possible. They're meant to use the same language. They don't use FOV, they use lens size. And the reason they do that is because they want to be accessible to people who use cameras, people who are familiar with how cameras work. And if you want to do cinematography in Unreal Engine, you're probably best off getting a DSLR camera and experimenting. You can get a camera used, you can buy them fairly cheap. You can also get an app on your phone that simulates DSLR lenses, and then you can see what the differences are on them. But stuff like f-stop and that kind of thing, you're gonna want to mess around with a DSLR camera, but basically they determine depth of field and stuff. We'll get into that. You can use a universal zoom. That's probably just fine for now. When I'm working, I tend to take the focus method, put it on disable.
I'm disabled.
Just because I don't want to worry about the focus right now. And here on the focal length, you can see I determined the zoom, and it uses focal length numbers. So a 22mm would be a 22, and you get a very wide angle lens. Now, a wide angle lens doesn't necessarily mean it's only used for wide shots. You can do a close-up with a wide angle lens, and that creates a certain kind of look. And you could do a close-up with a zoom lens, and you can have the subject be the same frame size, it just compresses space differently. If I now enable the focus, and we set the focus to be on Rin, you kind of get a sense of what this is going to look like. Typically when I'm making the first camera in a sequence, I like to spend a little bit of time just getting the settings the way I want. For one, I like the anamorphic look. That has to do with how bokeh is rendered. You can see these little blots here. See how they're circular? On an anamorphic lens, which is a lens used all the way from back in the 1960s when cinema was competing with television, they made these wide-angle lenses so that it could film things in a different aspect ratio to entice people to come to the theaters. And since they did that back then, that's how we now today still associate big blockbuster movies looking like. They tend to have wide aspect ratios and tend to have oval bokeh. So if I grab the squeeze factor here and I can turn it up to 2, you can see it creates this wide angle lens. Now I can also set the crop to 16:9, and if I set the focus here back on Rin, you can see if you just look at Abram's little focal brace here, you can see what happens when I set it to 0 or 1. You can see how the bokeh is circular, or if I set it to 2, it turns oval. It's a subtle thing, but it's one of those little tricks that help us create a more cinematic look. Another one like that is putting a bit of film grain on it. You can go to post-process, film grain intensity, 0.4. Obviously you can set it up to like 200 and something gross happens, but 0.4 I think is usually enough grain that you notice that there's a bit of a texture to it. A post-process, every camera has a post-process like this on it. And if you're familiar with Unreal, you know that post-processes kind of layer on top of each other, and you could set them to different priority levels, so that priority 0 is highest priority and then higher numbers I think are lower, or maybe it's the other way around. Regardless, in Sequencer, the post-process is always on top. It is the highest priority. And if you just leave it unticked, use the system default. So if the default post-process in this level was, film grain 5 billion, and I left it unticked, it would now be 5 billion, but by ticking it, I set it to the value I want it to be. This allows us in the sequence, in the cinematography and the cutscenes, to have more control over what exactly things look like. And you can animate these values so that they're different, and then you can change it, you can do effects with it, or you can just make sure you hone in the look as detailed as you want. You can also set lens-specific post-process, so we can go and create bloom. Actually, if we film Abram from the other angle, see there's a bunch of text in the background that disappears in build, so we're not worrying about it. You can see this little light back here. You can see by messing around with the bloom, you can see it changes how much that bloom in the background blooms. But you can also see it has an effect on Abram. It sort of makes him soft. You can change the kernel size. If you go here, there's a pack on the Unreal Store with a bunch of different anamorphic looks. You can grab kernels, or kernel, and then they do some funky stuff. And they can really help if you're trying to get a specific sort of look going. You can do the same. You can go to lens flares, get a bokeh shape, and that's where these are from. These are not default, these are on the store, they're not that expensive. And you can, mess around with this and create lens flares and stuff like that. Then I often just fly around, I have a little look at the scene, I'm thinking, is this what I'm looking for? Sometimes we put a little dirt mask on. Now this is something you're a VFX artist at your team, or maybe you're working solo, maybe you've done this already in your post-process volumes, but you can put the slightest bit of screen dirt just to muddy up the screen a little bit. And one thing I often do is I grab a camera shake and I put it on. I have this micro and slow camera shake. Now, if you want to learn how to make these are literally me copying settings from William Foucher, who does a YouTube channel where he talks all about Unreal Sequencer and how to use it to create awesome cinematics, and he teaches you how to make camera shakes. I've since then made a whole bunch of other camera shakes, but his base settings are really, really good, so I've used them in a bunch of shots and a whole bunch of our cutscenes. And once you layer that on, it sort of brings the camera to life a little bit, like there's an operator holding it, so it slightly moves, just a smidge, and it tends to take out that sort of robotic look that cutscenes in Unreal have, where they kind of float around and everything seems a little bit unreal. Here, it just puts a little shake on and keeps it slightly alive. And you can also adjust the values of them. You can go to Properties, Play Scale, half, and that reduces how much everything shakes. So you don't need to create a whole bunch of different camera shakes. You could just create a handful and then have them at different play scales. I think we're only using 10 camera shakes all in all in the game, and they're just playing at different play scales, looped with different ones. Sometimes there are multiple stacked on top of each other. We could play around with all that kind of stuff. At this point, it's looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here into camera and I'm going to put the focus to disable.
I'm disabled.
Because when I start framing up shots, this is going to break all the time, and you're going to have huge stretches where things are out of focus and stuff like that. So you just disable it while you're working. And then I try and think of, how do I want to frame this? Now, I said they're sort of antagonistic, right? I said that they're kind of button heads. Is Rin going to kill him? What's going to happen, right? We're going to create that suspense. So, if we put on a wide lens, things tend to look a little at ease, comedic. Comedies are filmed on wide lenses, right? But the spy thrillers, Jason Bourne and stuff, they're filmed on very long lenses. So we could go to a very long lens, pull the camera way back, and now they feel sort of, at odds. This might be too much. We might want to save that for something where the stakes really are that high. So here we're just going to go to the 70. How do you know which number to pick? How do you know 70 instead of 150? How do you pick? You're just going to have to mess around and explore and see what you like and see what you don't like, and play around with it until you find what you enjoy. And then another thing is, what angle do you film them at, right? Do we do close-up? Do we go all the way here? Do we go wide shot, all the way far back? What about like a really low angle? Looking up at them, that's really cool. And then I often find myself getting into a trap when I'm looking at these frames, because there's a tendency with amateur filmmakers to think of every shot as having to be unique and perfect and special. But what happens is, if you have a string of special, unique shots back to back to back to back to back, it looks like you're really unconfident. It looks like you're trying to compensate for something. It comes up a little weird. And that's not what most big blockbuster movies look like. They tend to be filmed with what's called coverage. They get a shot of character A, they get a shot of character B, and then they get a master with both of them. And now, whatever happens, they can cut to one of those shots. And then you take those special shots you're excited about and you sprinkle them in. You pick and you're deliberate and you think, I'm going to put it here. You do it with deliberation. When you do that, you tend to bring out the sort of best of what you have to offer, right? You tend to bring out the point you're trying to make. So something like a really good close-up, 150 mil, on his face. This will be a cool shot, but it's also telling me that he's saying something important. Or let's say we get the 50 millimeter, we get a low angle. This is a cool shot, but it's also telling me that he's, a giant, a hero, facing off against impossible odds. So we're gonna save it. We don't need it now, right? If we use this all the time, it loses all meaning. If you watch the first Thor movie, for instance, there's a lot of Dutch angles, and they use it so much in that movie that you just stop thinking about the fact that there are Dutch angles. Everything is a Dutch angle all the time. Everything's always sort of crooked at a 30 degree angle or something like that. So if you do too much of something, it tends to sort of lose some of its intensity. So we're gonna go back to the 70 mil, and we're just gonna shoot him at a fairly normal coverage. We're gonna get a dirty single, get your mind out of the gutter. That's what it's called. A regular single would be just with Abram in it, but because it's a clean frame, only one subject. But if we dirty it up by getting a little bit of Rin's shoulder in here, it's not as clean a frame, looks a little gritty. Now we're gonna try and frame it up. And there's this good light in the background. I'd love to get that in frame, just because it'll look nice. We have some leading lines. There's this tunnel behind him. I'm gonna try and frame it so that his head is in that tunnel. I think that'll look nice. We'll get a little bit of her shoulder, and then we'll try and align it to the rule of thirds a bit. The rule of thirds is this thing where you take a frame and you split it into thirds up and down and across, and then you frame your subject so that it lands on one of those points. You don't have to do it. It's not an actual rule, but it's useful. All right, so here we go, cam 1, and now I'm going to rename this. Let's call it midshot Abram, MS Abram. There we go. And then I'm just going to duplicate it. Remember, I did all those base settings. I'm not going to repeat them. That's a lot of work. Can't be arsed. Let's spend our time making the game look good, not on clicking the same buttons over and over again. And now we're going to get a reverse shot, meaning it's the same shot, but in the other direction. There we go. Now when we cut between the two of these, they should match. They should look like they're looking at each other. Now notice if I take this shot and I put it on this side and we break the 180, they cut together weird, right? Because they're looking in the same direction. So we're gonna go back here. That looks pretty good. There's some weird lighting stuff going on in the background here. We're not worrying about that right now. We're just doing the cameras. All right, now let's get the master. Copy, paste, camera 3. We're gonna call it master.
Yes, master.
And zip, and we're gonna try and get both of them in. Oh, now our lens is too long. It's clipping through the cave wall. So we're gonna need to get a wider lens. There we go. And now, whatever they're doing in this position, I've got myself covered, right? Can cut from here to here to here. And sometimes I'll watch and I'll just click play and I'll just sort of see what happens if I cut. They're no longer perfectly framed, but we'll animate those in a bit. What about when she's reading the letter? She spends a long time not looking at him, just looking at this letter. Now we bust out that special shot I was talking about. The letter has importance. So when we make a special exception to shoot a unique looking shot that breaks from regular coverage, we are telling the audience, this is important, pay attention, right? So we're gonna go camera 4, not gonna be called mid shot, whatever. We're gonna call it letter shot. Letter shot. We go here. Sometimes when you copy paste, it resets some things. So the focus method's manual back, but we're just gonna turn it off. And here we go. We're gonna get a little shot of Rin reading this letter. There's a point light in the background. We're gonna try our best to ignore that because it won't be there. Switch it to a 50 mil just so it's a little more neutral framing. And there we go. And with this shot, we're gonna go and animate the transform. So obviously you're not stuck with wherever you place the camera. You can animate it across the timeline. Here's a letter shot. We're gonna put a keyframe. We're gonna put the keyframe when she looks up, looks back at Abram, right? We're gonna use the actor to tell us what we're doing. So we're gonna go here. This is as close as we're gonna get. So we're gonna put a keyframe real close. Delete the other keyframe. When does she look down on the letter for the first time? Here. Go back. I'm using WASD to navigate the camera around. Q goes down, E goes up. Now I'm in the rocks. We don't want to be in the rocks. Like here. Now as she reads the letter, the camera will push in on her. Now I'm noticing, because now we switched to a wider lens, it's no longer a 75mm, it's a 50mm, the camera shake is a little too subtle. So we can just go back in your properties, we can go mess with the play scale, let's put it, 8. Do it for both of these. That looks better to me. Another thing is, because of the way keyframes work, if they start exactly at a certain moment, it can look a little robotic. So what I often do is I just put them a little bit outside the zone of where I'm actually going to use them. I try and never cut to a moment when the keyframe starts moving. I try and cut when the movement's already happening. So now by the time she actually takes the letter, camera's already moving. And it'll just move a little bit faster as we get further into the Bezier curve of the two keyframes we got here. I'm getting a lot of headspace. Headspace is the space between the top of someone's head and the top of the frame. And too much of it looks weird, and not enough looks weird. So if I frame it like this, that's goofy. And if I frame it like this, that's no good. So you just want the head to be sort of licking that line a little. And you can see it's generating keyframes automatically. I'm just going in, click, drag. And because I've got this button here, click, create a key when properties change, it's doing it for me. I don't have to go in and click on a new keyframe every point. And it only keys the changed elements. You can see it doesn't key the scale value at all, or all the rotation values, which is good because that way you don't have to go from a full change. If you key everything every time, the camera will completely swerve. But if you just make these minor adjustments, what you want to try and do, you create a master key from one end, master key from on the other, and adjustments in between, then it'll all look more natural because it's only adjusting the things that you're actually needing to adjust, and it's not creating these sharp angles at which the camera snakes around. Here we're losing our headspace again, so we go put it back. Now let's go edit this. So I'm going to go add, camera cut track, click, make sure it cuts to a specific camera, and we'll just set it to the master for now. You can right click here, go master. And if you click on this camera, you are now possessing the edit. I'll go in edit, split selection, master. There's a cut in the animation here. We're going to place it on there. That cut in the animation is there because that's where the original cut was before I deleted all the stuff to show you folks, but whatever, we're going to pretend like that's not there. You can see now it cuts between these cameras. Split, letter shot. So now we've got a little edit going. Cut. Cut. Now, where you cut and why you cut is very important, right? We could now, Abram starts talking, we could now cut back to him talking. You know, go, split. Abram. And then we're communicating to the audience that what he's saying is important. But right now I want to communicate to the audience what Rin is reading is important. It's more important than what he's saying, because we can hear him, and I want to see what she's reading. She's realizing something. So we stay with her. That's an artistic choice, right? This is not a science. There's really no right answer for any of this stuff. You just sort of have to feel it out. Cut, go back to him. Now you could go and watch and create shots as you go along. You could do that. But I like to think of this like I'm on a film set, right? We're talking about coverage. The reason they do coverage on a film set is because that way they know they're secure when they leave the set. And now it's 8 months later and they're editing and they have the shots they need, right? So I try and apply that method anywhere I can. Same with the special shots, right? We know that we only have a certain amount of time to do special shots on big budget movies, right? Or any movie. You only have a limited amount of time. So they're not going to set up for special shots all the time. So we try and make sure that special shots in our video game are as rare as they would be if this were a major movie. Same method when I'm editing. I don't like to do editing until I've set up a bunch of cameras. Now, sometimes I might set up a camera specifically for the edit, but a lot of the times I set up my cameras like I'm on a film set. I go, okay, I need to get this shot, this shot, this shot. I watch the scene, I keep adding shots, and then I edit. And then I adjust the shots to fit the edit because we have that power, we have that luxury, right? But I try and get the angles that I want first, and then I edit to make it fit those angles, right? So I'm always thinking, how would a real director do this with real cameras? So here, or also, when you're thinking about editing, think about why you're editing. You want to edit on the eyes, right? Abram's looking at her, cut back because she's about to look away. If you cut and she's looking away, it looks a bit funky. So you want to cut when they're looking at each other. So as soon as she looks back, that's when we cut. We could afford to cut a little bit earlier. She looks at him for a bit longer than that. And there's a reaction we're just missing. So we go in and nudge it. Now he's asking. She doesn't respond. So I want to see how she's feeling. She's very stern for a question like that. What's going on? Then there's movement. The other thing, other than cutting on eyes, you cut on movement. We see her hand suddenly move. Where's the movement? What's going on? Well, we keep our audience hooked. We go to the master. Sword up. Putting it away, right? So now Abram moves. So we might go into this shot here. We might put a keyframe here. And then just imagine the camera operator following him. That way we can also go through the sequence and sort of make sure he's always framed up. Think about headspace, think about where you are in the scene, think about why you're doing what you're doing. And you do this for all the shots in your sequence, right? You go, okay, let's go to Rin. frame her up, transform. Sometimes I move the camera in and out. You know, I try and imagine the cinematographer reacting to what would be happening on stage, right? The actors are moving around, they're doing stuff. The cinematographer is trying to capture the best angle all the time. And what's important about that is the cinematographer can't beat the actors to it. On a film, when the actor moves, the camera follows. It doesn't go first, right? Unless you're feature, then they go at the same time. So in this, we're going to try our best to make sure when the actor moves, the camera follows. That way it feels alive, it behaves in a way you'd expect a film to behave. That's how we create that sort of cinematic experience in our cutscenes. Now, one thing I like the idea of is, as the tension disappears from the scene, we can have them start with these dirty singles where the shoulder's in frame, but then we maybe peel back the curtains. What does that look like? Sometimes I just try things, you know, I'm messing around, I'm trying to figure out how can I tell this story visually. So here, what if you ended up like that? Just delete some keyframes. We slowly frame her out of the shot as the tension starts to evaporate. We're going to get rid of this key. When you're happy with your setup and all your shots, you can go through and do a focus pass. In this case, I'll go here, I'll pick a keyframe. I'll go to Focus Manual. I'll put a keyframe. I'll click on Draw Debug Focus Plane. It creates this purple plane that shows me where the focus is. I'll just make it clip through Abram. Click the button, go to the next keyframe, adjust. Go to the next keyframe, adjust. I'll do this for all the keyframes. And sometimes he moves out of this plane. Like here, he's way too close, so we gotta move the focus plane again. This is a lot of work. It's time consuming, but it's what creates this sort of depth of field look. There you go, now he's sort of got this depth of field going on. You can see Rin is out of focus, the background's out of focus. One thing here is you can set how much depth of field there is. There's an aperture setting. It's currently at 2.8. You could set it to 1 and everything becomes extra blurry. Probably more obvious if I get Rin in frame. 2, 1, 2, 1. You can set it to 8 or 12 or 24 and now everything's in focus. I like to stay around a 5 or a 6. Anything much more and you start to get like blur artifacting on your high detail assets, you want to try and avoid that. You see how the sword looks sort of smudgy but also sharp. That's not how focus would behave. It tends to break down around those limits. So I'm usually happy with about a 6. That way we get a bit of bokeh on her here and bokeh on the background. That's sort of the sweet spot for me. I talk a lot about rules in this video, the 180-degree rule, rule of thirds, but it's also important to remember that you're an artist if you're doing this stuff, and that means that you need to just play around. I think audiences are really good at noticing when artists are having fun. So make sure to have fun, make sure to try weird stuff. You know, get excited about your letter shot or whatever your specialty shots are. Put a few of them in, and occasionally when inspiration strikes, just go for it, you know? What if right now we just went here and what if we really wanted to sell this idea that, you know, she's in her head about her dad? We create a new shot called Funky Shot. We go in here and we go like really close on her and, you know, we put chromatic aberration on and, you know, something weird and funky, and you could do that. You just mess around, play around, you know, create fun things, because it's important for the work you do that you are having fun, because people will be able to tell. And obviously the one thing I didn't really touch on here, but you will see if you compare what I'm doing right now to the scene that's in the gameplay trailer, where you can watch the rest of the scene, is that lighting is hugely important. It is the key to all of this. Good lighting is the difference between, you know, a good cinematography and bad cinematography. You know, bad lighting will ruin good assets. Somebody might make a beautiful asset, put it in your engine. If you light it badly, it looks like hot garbage. It's bad. So it kind of ruins the work of everyone who came before you. So, you know, good lighting can also elevate games that look fairly bland. I mean, I play Minecraft with a shader pack. It's a world difference. So if you can, get good lighting artists or be prepared to spend a lot of time on lighting. That's it for now. If you think this game looks cool, you can add it to your Steam wishlist by clicking the first link in the description below. If you haven't seen our trailer, click on this video here, and if you want to watch how we use motion capture to actually film all this stuff, click on this video here. If you've seen both and you want to see more, then make sure to subscribe and be notified when we upload new videos. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in IMA.